Hello and welcome to TBI's Share the Light podcast series. I'm Jody Sanders, a lay leader here at TBI, which basically again means I have no qualifications whatsoever to lead religious life here at the synagogue, except that I'm Jewish and was willing to get voted onto the board. Now, again, we would like to thank Multicultural Victoria and a special thanks to the Cultural Affairs team in Victoria's Department of Premier and Cabinet who approved the grant that is allowing us to share the light, this Jewish festival of Hanukkah, with all of you listeners and possibly watchers too. Now, to talk to us a little bit today, we have a very special guest. Her name is Tammy Cohen, and Tammy is actually the Learning and Engagement Mashpia, which means guide, here at TBI. Welcome, Tammy.
Hi, Jody. Thank you.
So, Tammy, you grew up here at TBI. Maybe tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into what you actually do now.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up here. I've been a member for my whole life, and all of my youngest childhood memories of being Jewish were all here in this space and at the King David School, where I went to school the whole way through daycare through until the end of VCE.
Wow.
And yeah, some of my earliest memories involve sitting out here, looking out at the sanctuary where we're sitting, and being with my grandparents and with my parents and my siblings, joining for Shabbat services and different festivals and things like that. I really remember my brother preparing for his bar mitzvah. So we would come every week, and he's older than me, and I was really excited to come every single week with them. So by the time I got to my bar mitzvah, I already was really comfortable with the prayers because I'd sort of learnt them along the way with him while he was learning them.
That's great. How much older is your brother than you?
He's 2 years older.
Oh, great. So you sort of had that 2-year prep time in the run-up to your bat mitzvah, with his bar mitzvah, to be able to get those learnings. That's gorgeous. And so tell us, so your whole family is very involved here in the synagogue. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my mom is the vice president, Judy Cohen, one of the vice presidents here at TBI at the moment.
Of the board?
Of the board,
yes.
Yeah. And so she's really involved with the religious life of the congregation.
In fact, she chairs that committee.
She does. And many other things as well. It keeps her busy and involved. And my dad and sister have been involved with the security group here, sort of overseeing what happens as people come in and out of the building, just to make sure that we're safe while we're inside the building.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think your mother did quite a lot, and probably your dad too, with COVID recently, to help make sure that the building was COVID safe, that we had all the right practices in place. Maybe share even a little bit about that. I know I had to check in when I got into the building, wearing a mask whenever possible, except obviously during these interviews, but we're far apart, and we've got our hand sanitizers close by. There's signs everywhere. And your mom was really sort of spearheading that, wasn't she?
Yeah, so Mum has a business, Care with Quality, that looks after elderly and disabled people and goes into their homes. So she has carers who go into people's homes, and they have been doing that through COVID. So as part of her business practices, she's very involved with different health organizations to make sure those procedures and protocols are, at really good standards, and she's able to share
some of that learning with TBI.
With TBI and help us make sure we're safe in this space as well. Yeah.
It's one of the great things about, I suppose, working and living in a community, is that you have that opportunity to take shared knowledge that you have from outside a particular group and then share it in another group. And, when it comes to you and some of the things that you've done in your own studies, from your passion and love of Judaism, I think you know a little bit more about that than I do. Maybe give us a little bit about what you studied and where you studied, Tammy.
Yeah, sure. So I just completed 2 master's programs.
2 masters?
2.
Wow, done.
Thank you. One in Jewish education and one in Jewish nonprofit management.
Okay.
So I was studying at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, which is an American-based school.
Yes.
And they send all of their students to Israel for a year first. So I lived in Jerusalem for a year 3 years ago now.
Wow.
And then spent 2 years in Los Angeles.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you went to Hebrew Union College, and interestingly, for the listeners that have been listening to these podcasts religiously, get it religiously. That was just a little.
No,
joke.
that was
See
good.
where I was going
Yep.
with that, right? We heard that some of our rabbis actually went there as well. Now, you didn't study to be a rabbi. You studied very specifically how to be a Jewish educator,
Right.
and also how to work in non-for-profit. What are the distinctions in that?
So the Jewish education part really focuses on the religious schools and supplementary Jewish education, so supporting students, young students in their learning if they don't go to a Jewish day school. So helping them with Hebrew and the Judaica content, learning about the festivals, learning about the Torah, the Bible stories, learning about the mitzvot, the commandments. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about what supplementary Jewish education spaces can look like.
Okay, and why is that important? Why is it important for young kids that are Jewish to get a Jewish education in as much as they get a regular secular education?
Well, so much of Judaism is based upon learning, you know.
Okay.
We tell the same stories year after year when we read from the Torah, from the Bible, and we try to find new meaning and how they relate to our lives today. And that's one of the things that I love about being a Jewish educator, is working with people of all ages and different stages of life and different life experiences to find their own connection to Judaism and to those stories and the values, and to sort of find their own meaning and see how that can inspire their lives. So for young learners, to sort of instill those values and those stories when they're young, to learn some of the rituals for some of the festivals, and so that the practices can be, you know, not just when they're in the synagogue, but can infuse into their home lives, and so that they can share their experiences of what it's like to be Jewish with, you know, their family, with their friends, and with people who aren't Jewish as well.
And so that, I mean, that's such an important part, I suppose, of even creating culture, right? You know,
Right.
understanding culture is defined by the beliefs and the shared values and the rituals and things that people have. And so educating people in that, and of course we're here for multicultural Australia, and sharing that is so critical. And you do that specifically. What age do you start with kids? Like, what are you for, just primary school age or secondary or both?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
So our religious school here at Temple Beth Israel starts from prep, but we have a number of different engagement programs for really young kids as well. We have a Bubs and Bagels group that starts with newborns.
So cute. I've seen them come in.
Yeah,
They're
it's
adorable.
really adorable to have family, grandparents, whoever it is, bringing young kids into the synagogue space to learn and play and sing together.
And eat a bagel.
And eat a bagel, because, you know,
Let's be
bagels
honest,
are
there
very
has to be
important.
a food that goes along with everything we do.
Yeah.
And we've even been doing Bubs and Bagels on Zoom during COVID. Which has
Right,
been
yeah.
nice
So
for them to
I've had the joy of joining into the Bubs and Bagels group over the last few months, and
Right.
Ido Sagir and Nat Stone were doing it in person. Ido and the rabbis were leading that while during COVID through the first part, just them, and broadcasting out, live streaming the Bubs and Bagels
Like Jewish
mornings.
Wiggles.
Right, exactly, with lots of songs, they created a virtual background with some of the toys that are really popular here.
Right.
There's a dinosaur that comes visiting for Shabbat, for the Sabbath, and so that dinosaur was up there on the background. So, you know, they really found ways to reference the points of contact that the kids and the families are used to when they're in the building, and to put them into the virtual online offerings that they've been doing. Yeah.
That's gorgeous. And then, so past sort of that preschool age, then what does a Jewish child do after that? So sort of taking our listeners and our viewers through the sort of educational pathway of a Jewish child.
Yeah.
That goes for this type of education.
Right, and it's really different, because some families connect to some of those programs, and then their kids go to a Jewish day school, so they might not come to our after-school
Like King
program,
David.
like King David, or
Where they offer the education actually as part of the secular learning.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, King David, you learn Hebrew and Jewish studies and celebrate the festivals and things like that at school. And then some families also come for the family activities and different festival celebrations that we have here at TBI, as well as, and then some come to supplementary school education, which is after school hours.
After school. So I grew up in a conservative synagogue in the United States, and then also moved to a Reform synagogue. And we used to call that Hebrew school when we were kids. And that didn't matter if we were actually learning Hebrew or we were learning history or we were learning about festivals. It was just called flat
Always
out
called Hebrew school.
Hebrew school, right.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was living in LA. They always call it Hebrew school. And in some schools in America, Hebrew school's on one day of the week, and then religious school, the Judaica content, the festivals, the stories, other than the language part, is on a different day of the week.
Right.
But here at TBI, we do them on one day together.
Right.
So for different parts of the session, there's a Hebrew teacher, and then there's learning of Judaica content, which we explore through music and through art and through other activities and things like that. So really try to bring all aspects of creativity and different ways of learning together.
And so, are the kids sort of separated by age groups, or how does that work up until the sort of 12, 13 bat and bar mitzvah ages?
Yeah, so our students are divided by their year levels.
Right.
And then sometimes we do it based on their Hebrew experience as well.
Right.
But yeah, at the moment, especially in this COVID year with everything being online, it's fallen into mostly being by their age group, like school year levels. And some of the kids go to school together, to the local public schools together, so they know each other through there, and when they can come in the building, they carpool together and things like that. So it's also a great way to build community and for friendships to evolve in that space as well.
For sure. And sometimes I suppose that even leads into, we're going to be speaking with Sefi, who is another professional with youth who looks after our Netzer program, the progressive youth movement here in Australia. Sometimes those after-school education or even the Jewish day schools lead to the extra involvement in the youth groups as well, like Netzer.
Yeah, so I went to Netzer for a few years back in primary school. And I went with, lots of my school friends from King David, and met some other people who didn't go to Jewish day schools as well there. So that's again, another way to sort of build community and build the ways that people connect and share their different ways of being Jewish.
That's lovely, lovely. And so post bar and bat mitzvah, what do kids do then, to be able to learn or engage?
Mm-hmm. So this is a space that around the world we're really building. We spent a lot of time talking about this in both the nonprofit program that I studied and also in the education component as well. And it asks the question of, how do we connect with young people today? What is it that they want? How do we evolve our programs and our offerings so that it's engaging and connects with them and addresses the values and the concerns and the ways that they want to live their lives. And that's a space that I'm really privileged to get to work in here at TBI, and just new in my role here over the last few months, although I've worked here before.
Yes.
I went away to study. So I'm really excited about building that space, about connecting with, young Jews and their family and their friends and the wider community, and creating spaces for them to come together and engage in the ways that are meaningful for them.
Yeah, I feel quite passionate about this space too, as you know, and I'm so thrilled that you're having this opportunity, that we as a community have a professional like you that's here to really work in that particular area. Because once a child has their bar or bat mitzvah and is now, practicing as a religious adult in the community, the next life event that they generally have is their wedding, which is a long way off from 12 or 13, particularly
Right.
today. And
Yeah.
so finding ways to engage, before the wedding and have people feel connected, whether it's through, youth activities in a youth movement or through further education, that's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really fun to see what you do in this space. Any ideas, any tidbits you can maybe tell the...
Well, definitely the youth movements are a big way that people connect, and that's really about community and those connections. But I also see with the young people in our community that they have really strong values about the big issues of today, like climate change,
Yes.
and about the way that we connect with the First Nations and Indigenous Australians and things like that.
Social justice.
Yeah, so, and that's so Jewish,
yeah.
the social justice, tikkun olam, the repairing of the world, all of those values are so core to being Jewish and the way that we live our lives. So I see them as some of the ways that young Jews want to connect.
And so maybe finding ways to channel some of their energy and passions into, sort of an activism that will give them purpose and meaning, and ways to connect might be really, really positive. So I'll look forward to, and as I know everybody else will, to what you're going to be doing in that space. Now, you also studied not just only education. You didn't just do one master's. No, you did two.
Two.
And your second master's was in non-for-profit management,
right.
which is a wonderful space. And gosh, I can say it's something that is a great opportunity for you here in Australia. Tell us a little bit about that. What did you learn in that space? And what are you hoping to do with it?
Yeah, so it had the classic components of a non-for-profit degree. We talked about working with board structures, different organizations. What are the legal and financial components of being a non-profit entity? And did classes in marketing and all sorts of things that...
So you did the business stuff.
Did the business stuff, but we did it all through a Jewish lens as well.
Okay.
And so... Yeah, so many of our classes, we looked at different organizations and the way that they're structured, and met with professionals and board members about starting new organizations that have existed for, many decades or even longer, to sort of see how they evolve and how is it that Jewish organizations can grow and can... evolve their practices. We've seen synagogues move from being very community-based and lay-led based to also including in those practices a lot of business values and ways of working. Yeah.
So can you share, what does a Jewish lens mean for people that, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah, it really means that that the way that the organization works follows those Jewish values.
So give us a few examples. You mentioned Tikkun Olam, which is about healing the world.
Healing the world.
What's some other values that are sort of entrenched in Jewish life that you think would be a good descriptor?
Yeah, so I think the telling of Jewish stories is a really a core one. And the way that an organization talks about itself, the way that it depicts itself online, what does the website look like, is a business sort of lens. But when you think about it through a Jewish lens, then you can add in the stories.
So the stories, of course, are really around core values and having the opportunity to understand how we relate to each other as people and how we look after families and others that are perhaps disadvantaged or in any type of need.
Yeah, so it's to say that this is not just what we do and, how much it costs to be a member or, those sorts of things, but really telling the story about the work that the organization does and the ways that it interacts with the wider community, the way that the individuals within the organization communicate. Those sorts of things come from this Jewish value of telling stories and this Jewish idea that has been passed on, from generation to generation.
Kind of that connection to mission and purpose of an organization and why it exists and what it does, and then having those core values sort of led through that. Is
Yeah, yeah, and making them center focus of the organization, of decision making, of what gets put on the website, so that when other people want to engage with the organization, that they really see those things front and center.
So what makes that uniquely Jewish? Certainly there'd be organizations that care about their mission and purpose and values and how they connect, and they'd be non-Jewish organizations. What makes them particularly Jewish, do you think?
I think it's the ways that the mitzvot, the commandments, the rules, the laws, the ideas of how people engage with one another come to that center point, and using the words and the language of the Jewish values and traditions. So like tikkun olam, like repairing the world that we mentioned. Other ones like pikuach nefesh, like to save a life and to put the needs of other people first. Tzedakah, justice and righteousness.
Tzedakah meaning?
Literally translates to justice.
Yes.
And often is implemented through the giving of financial donations, but can appear in many different ways of how we help make sure that people have what they need to live their lives and to feel equal to each other.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other ones that you'd share that sort of come to mind? Because I think, for some of our listeners, they might not be really aware of, what is a mitzvot? What is even a commandment? What does that mean? And how do Jews relate to those? Do you want to talk a little bit about even mitzvot?
Yeah, sure. So the mitzvot are the commandments, literally the rules, 613 of them written in the Torah, in the Bible. And they have, some of them have very core strong standings in the progressive lens, and we follow some of them.
From an interpretive standpoint. So again, we talked to, Rabbi Gersh talked about, the idea of, do you look at the Bible as being exact and literal, or do you look at it as being interpretive and having the opportunity to take stories? And in the progressive movement, it's more about the interpretation of all 613 of those commandments as opposed to following them in a literal way.
Right, exactly.
And so in that, what would you say are some of those core tenets that you were mentioning before?
Yeah, so we have behind us the 10 Commandments, the big 10 up there.
Which people would know, right?
Like do not murder, do
Right.
not steal. And they also have ones that relate specifically to Judaism about our relationship with God and about keeping Shabbat, the Sabbath. So those are some of the statements, but I think there's also, universal values in there that are shared amongst different religions and different cultures and societies and things like that. But I think that the way that we take on those values is that essence, just like you were saying, that Rabbi Gersh described, understanding that there are all of these commandments, all of these ways that through generations we've passed on how we want to live our lives, and then we see how they work in today's society.
And how we interpret them for the ever-changing world, really.
Right.
And the things that we need to look to perhaps, get active in to be able to support and help.
Yeah. And another one that comes to mind is B'Tselem Elohim. And that comes from the first story in the Torah, the story of creation of the world and the creation of the human beings. And B'Tselem Elohim literally means to be made in the image. And it's talking about the image of God. And it says that, that all humans are equal. And so that even though we all look different, sound different, have all of those differences, if we're all made in the image of God, we all have that essence of God within us, then there is equal partnership amongst all peoples. And that's a value that I think really drives many nonprofit organizations in their values and in their missions, but not just from the work that they do out in the community, but also in the way that they relate to each other within the organization. And that was a big part also of what we studied and talked about, is how do we bring that value, how do we talk about respect in the workplace, all those sorts of things, but through that Jewish lens of saying, well, actually, this is something that's a Jewish value, and so how do we make sure that it's core in every moment of our work, not just when we're out there in the wider community.
And in that, you see the face of God in everyone, and that's sometimes easy to do when it's easy, but hard to do when it's hard, right?
Right.
If you're in a situation where, perhaps in a business sense, where you're in a big disagreement with someone around, what to do next in the next phase of the business, that's not the moment where you're thinking to yourself, I see the face of God in that person, and we can find our common thoughts. But that's actually the time when you want to draw upon those values to sort of say, hey, how can we bring the temperature down here in our discussions and have a chance to connect and look forward? So would you suggest that that's sort of the types of ways that you could use it in a practical sense?
Right, yeah.
And think about how you can work collaboratively together and create different things. So fantastic. So it sounds like, you came back really well prepared, both from an education standpoint about Jewish education and understanding also how to implement, core business acumen along the lines of Jewish values. And so in thinking about that, you mentioned that you lived in the US, and you also lived in Israel. And so we might just touch on, as an Australian, growing up here in Australia, and one of the things that's been really unique about even the guests that we've had on our quote-unquote Share the Light show here, is that people have had so many different backgrounds and have grown up in so many different places. I think you're the only one who's been in Australia most of the time, as I'm thinking through. And Lawrence has been through, was here in Australia most of his life. But growing up Jewish here in Australia, what would you say was different when you went to the U.S. and when you went to Israel about some of the practices that you experienced in either the synagogue or in learnings that you thought, we don't do that in Australia, and what stuff did you find that was really similar?
Yeah, so the biggest difference comes from like the hemisphere difference, right? I'm not sure if anyone else mentioned the seasons being different. The idea, thinking to some of the Hanukkah ritual foods, or customary foods that we eat at this time of year. They're oily, they're heavy, and if it's hot, because we're in the middle of summer, that can be a bit of a challenge. But in the States and in Israel, it's winter, it's cold, it's sort of that comfort food thing. So it's interesting that as Jews have moved to Australia and, who have come from the other hemisphere, that those things have stayed part of our tradition. So that definitely was one big shock value that my American friends also felt. They were like, wait, you go to the beach for Hanukkah? Yeah, so that kind of thing as well.
Although this year, I don't know if we're getting to the beach. It's pretty cold this year.
We'll see. There's
still time. We almost turned on the heater last night. A bit crazy.
Yeah, it was chilly last night. That's one big difference. Another difference that I experienced being in Los Angeles is that the progressive community there is the majority of the Jewish community.
Right.
Whereas unlike here in Australia, the progressive Jews are the smaller group and the Orthodox Jews are the larger group.
Larger in the Jewish community, right.
Yeah.
So what was that like to be more of the majority, I guess?
It means that there's also a lot more Jews in America than there are here. So those two things together mean there's so many more organizations, so many more schools and synagogues and not-for-profits who are working in so many different spaces that you can move from place to place and really find that pocket, that thing that you connect with from different organizations in different ways. And there's so many more things, on offer at once.
That's right. That's right.
So that was cool to experience, lots of different synagogues, the way that they do their prayer practices, the way they celebrate festivals, the way they bring community together and things like that.
What did you find was the same?
There's so many things. that are similar. You know, even the way that we engage with the Torah scroll during a service. Some of those rituals of taking the scroll out of the ark, doing that, it replicates a reenactment of the giving of the Torah, of all the commandments and stories at Mount Sinai to Moses, of God giving those stories. That's what we reenact every time when we take the Torah out of the ark. So that's a cool thing to see, that all over the world, and you know, I've watched, there's YouTube videos of Jewish communities in Africa doing the same thing, and you hear those same melodies. So whilst I haven't experienced that in person, although I would love to one day, the fact that those traditions are universal around the world, around the Jewish world, is really, really cool.
It's remarkable, yeah. Cantor Laloum, Michelle talked about that a bit during his podcast. So if you haven't heard that one, go back and listen. It's really, really cool. And so having an opportunity to think about becoming a Jewish educator and knowing that was something that you set out for your life, I guess I just want to know, why did you want to do that? What was the most important thing to you about becoming a Jewish educator?
I think that for me, Judaism has always been that sort of central point that helps me connect to community and to family, and drives the way that I live my life, the values that I hold most closely. And as I had different opportunities to teach others that, which, you know, I started when I was really young, helping others prepare for their own bar and bat mitzvah, just a couple years after I had my own, that, you know, I really saw that those connections with other people was the way to build new things and to deepen those connections. I was involved in a youth choir here, where we brought different melodies and different instruments onto the bima and really connected my own Jewish practice with the melodies. And you know, I'm a singer and a musician as well, so that was a way for me to connect. And that was with other people, and it was in collaboration with the rest of the community. And so experiences like that was the Junior Chazanim back a while ago now, that really sort of inspired for me this desire to continue to grow and develop things like that. And the more I got to do that, the more I really realized that helping others find those connections for themselves, whether it be through music, whether it be through coming to prayer services, whether it be through helping others in the community in need, that I really wanted to develop those relationships with other people and help create new opportunities and meaningful connections.
Lovely,
yeah.
Just lovely. And so in thinking about our audience that is non-Jewish, maybe people that have been, you know, for the very first time watching these podcasts or listening to these podcasts and learning about Judaism for the first time, what would you say to them that's important to know about being Jewish? Or if, as an educator, what would you say is a message you'd like to put out there?
That we are open, and that we're welcoming, and that we really love learning. We are lifelong learners about our own values and cultures, and also about the traditions of other people as well. And
in fact, learning is actually very much a Jewish value. The purpose of study is to create a connectiveness in learning, isn't it?
Yeah. So many of our some of the core words that we use on a day-to-day basis come from these ideas of teaching and learning and education and all things like that.
Critical.
Yeah, so I think just that, you know, that we are a space here, and that we love sharing and learning, and so it's open for people to join us and to learn more whenever they'd like. Yeah.
It's excellent. And of course, we're constantly learning too. And
exactly,
we're just about to get to the last segment, which I like to call the 8 corny candle questions.
Okay.
Mind you, this is a segment that you came up with as an idea, so thank you for that. And let's light it up and get to our first question. Growing up, what was your favorite childhood Hanukkah memory?
So the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm actually not sure where this was, I'm not sure if it was at home or at school, But we had the dreidels, the spinning tops, and these plastic ones in all different colors. And I just have this memory of swapping colored dreidels with people. And I don't know, it must have been a big thing to either have a collection of all the colors or to have, our favorite color dreidel to spin and things like that. But definitely dreidel spinning and,
playing with your friends.
Playing with friends, having fun with that game. Yeah,
That's great.
It's definitely a big memory.
And what was your favorite color?
Probably purple back then.
Purple, fair enough.
Yeah.
And when looking at the number one favorite Hanukkah food, what would you say is the must-have for you? Why do you say it?
Latkes.
Latkes, okay.
Yeah.
And why the latkes?
Look, sufganiyat, jam donuts are also great.
Yes.
But savory food for me at the moment is, feeling that connection there.
As an American or a New York American, New York, New Jersey American, I didn't really understand the concept of donuts, jam donuts, until I moved here. I was like, what do you mean you have donuts? Maybe that's a summer thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Latkes was where I was at too, so
Yeah.
I understand. Now, there are 16 different ways to spell Hanukkah. How do you spell Hanukkah, and why do you think it's spelled differently?
Okay. So it's hard to do this without it being written down, but I'll see if
It's
I
all
can
right.
say
There's 16 opportunities to get it right. Don't worry.
it. Okay. Chanukah.
Okay.
Hanukkah. Yeah.
So I see you chose the one N version
One N.
and an H at the end and a CH at the beginning.
Yeah.
So what's your thinking on that?
Okay. So, well, the first letter is a chet. So it's got the ch sound, so it's got to have a ch
right.
at the beginning. And then there's a whole bunch of grammar stuff that about biblical Hebrew grammar. So I think from memory that means it's a one nun
Right.
situation. So nun being the
Being the
N
letter N
sound.
sound,
Yeah. So I think that's right, but I probably have to go and look it up.
Well, as an educator, we'll take your word for it. So
Yeah,
well done.
I'm still learning all the time too.
As we all are, which is great. Now, my next question is about your best dreidel story. You can talk about playing with the dreidel, buying or singing a dreidel. Of course, you did talk about the dreidels before, but what would be your best dreidel story?
Well, last night, I'll just go from the closest dreidel memory. I was leading Daily Daven, our evening prayer service with Rabbi Kim, and she told the community that I've been practicing this big thing to share with them. Anyway, it was a fun little kids' dreidel song that I have enjoyed singing with Ido at Bubs and Bagels and with my young nephew as well, where everyone gets to, put their hands up and be a sevivon, be a dreidel and spin around and things like that. So you can see recordings of that on sharethelight.org.au.
Excellent,
Yep.
excellent. Thank you for putting that plug in.
Yeah, no worries.
Shameless
Plug
promotion.
anytime.
Excellent, excellent. Well done. So definitely look that up. I was going to ask you to sing it, but since you put in the plug, that's great.
We'll send people there.
That's great. Now, do you exchange gifts at Hanukkah or any traditions that you have around this?
We have never been a family that gives lots of gifts on Hanukkah, not a every day of Hanukkah gift family. I do remember getting some gifts when I was younger. More than happy for my grandparents to restart that tradition if they like.
Another plug.
yeah.
Well done. Fantastic. All right, just a couple more questions. What Jewish holiday or festival, not including Hanukkah, do you enjoy celebrating the most and why?
Definitely Pesach, Passover.
Passover.
So that's the festival where we retell the story of freedom from slavery in Egypt, where Moses led the people out and then through the parted seas and into wandering in the desert and then receiving Torah. What I love about this festival is that we have a Seder, which means order. So there's a whole process of things that we go through. We retell the story. There's lots of songs. There's always some costumes. I have a theatre background, so any opportunity to sing and tell stories and have props and all those sorts of things is a big plus for me with celebrating Jewish festivals. And I have lots of memories of writing little plays with my cousins and my siblings when we were younger and sort of putting on these productions at our family gatherings to celebrate the festival.
Tammy, this is where you and I
Yeah.
are quite similar. I also have a theater background, as you know,
Yep.
love amateur theater. And yeah, we would have masks and little props and all sorts of things
Yeah.
to get us through the Seder.
Yeah. Another thing that I really love about it is that it's very much a home-based festival. So many of our festivals we gather here in the synagogue. The Pesach is one where we spend more time at home with our family and friends, and we might prepare our kitchens a little differently. We might do some cleaning out of bread and other chametz, that's the risen flour components, and remove that for a week. So it takes a little more preparation in the home, which I really like about it.
And creates that really special feeling of all the work that you've done to be able to enjoy that with your family and friends.
Yeah.
It's great. And so an outside looking in question, if you were to celebrate a holiday or festival from a different religion or culture, one that you might have done already or one that you're interested in, what would that one be?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is Thanksgiving.
Oh, Thanksgiving,
Which,
I know that holiday.
Which you know well, and I had the opportunity to celebrate the last couple of years, once in Los Angeles and another time in Israel, actually, with my American colleagues. And, you know, I feel like there's a very strong Jewish essence to Thanksgiving. You know, it's very Jewish to give thanks. We give thanks daily. As we walk around and live our lives, there's opportunities to be grateful and to offer blessings, or just to go through our days with a sense of gratitude. And so I really connected to that. And for those who I was celebrating it with, have a very strong family connection and things like that. So it's those values that really spoke to me about that festival. Yeah.
And great food.
And always lots of good food.
And last but not least, what is something the audience doesn't know about Hanukkah that you can share? If you were going to give a tidbit that somebody could take to a party, oh, I know this thing about Hanukkah, what would you say?
Well, that's a tough question. Yeah. Well, I was going to say all the different spellings, but we've already touched on that.
Yes.
I think the points that often get focused on is the food and the oil and the miracle of all of that. But there's another really important part about Hanukkah, which is about the community coming together and the rededication of the temple after it was destroyed. And, you know, as we sit in this space in 2020, we also are at the time when we are coming back into our synagogues after COVID, we're allowed to start coming back in slowly and things like that. So this year I feel a strong connection to that part of the story. So yeah, maybe I just share that there's the miracle of the oil lasting for a long time and things like that, but there's also this strong community reconnection part to it as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Tammy, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. It's been really great having you. Join us each night of Hanukkah at 6:15 as we share the light with candlelighting, music, stories, and more from our community and beyond. And each day of Hanukkah, you can collect free donuts. That's free. Do not have to be Jewish, through our donut drive-through between 5 and 6 p.m. here at TBI. Just drive through. We'll give you some donuts. They're really yum. Thank you very much. Shalom.